Architectural Outcast.
Randy here from the Architectural Outcast. Broadly speaking, there are two forms of communication, explicit and implicit. Explicit, being directly told, requires the person doing the communicating to do all the heavy lifting. On the other hand, implicit communication requires the person receiving the information to do the heavy lifting. They have to think through what's being communicated in order to understand it. Architecture, by its very nature, is implicit. It uses form, materiality, construction techniques, decorative elements to communicate ideas and emotions. Let me give you all a real-world example. You decide you want to buy a house. Houses within the same price range are going to have pretty much the same features, the same square footage, the same number of bathrooms, bedrooms, what have you. On paper, they're pretty much interchangeable. So why do people spend so much time looking for the right house? The reason is houses communicate to the world information about the owner. And people tend to get very picky about what their houses tell the world about them. Houses are just status symbols. Yeah, they can be, but it's way more complicated than that. Take a drive into the really expensive part of town where houses are worth millions of dollars, and you will find that house that screams money, luxury, expensive. And you'll say, yep, the person who lives there, they care about status. They're trying to impress people. But yet, the house right next door that has the same price tag and the same square footage is back off the street. It's low and blends in with its environment. The person that lives there views their house as an oasis away from the world's chaos. And then down the street, there's a house that's all Greek columns and pediments. The person who lives there values tradition and wants to live a structured, ordered life. The key to communication is a consistent message. In architecture, when the form, the materiality, the construction techniques, the design elements are all saying the same thing, it makes it easy to understand what the architecture is trying to say. If you notice that the building that screams luxury, wealth, expensive is covered in vinyl siding, you're going to do a double take. That materiality, vinyl siding, does not communicate expensive. You're going to take away a very different interpretation than the building intended. Symbolism matters, my friends. Symbolism matters. So let's see how well the city of Anvil communicates, how consistent they are in the use of their symbolism. The port city of Anvil is found in the far west of Cyrodiil. It's located in a small bay near the mouth of a major river that divides the provinces of Cyrodiil and Valenwood. Right off the bat, before we even see Anvil, we already have expectations. We're already making assumptions. Historically, a nation's port city's architecture was often a little different than the rest of the country. You have a city with people coming in and out regularly from different parts of the world, bringing their own attitudes towards architecture and their own aesthetic preferences. This causes the architecture of port cities to become much more eclectic. Anvil is located in a small sheltered valley on a rocky windswept coast. Anvil gives the impression of being low and hunkered down, bracing itself against the weather. Up until relatively modern times, the tallest building in a town would be the church or cathedral. And you see that very clearly here in Anvil. The cathedral towers over the rest of the town. Anvil, being located in a small valley, does shelter it from the weather, but it causes defensive problems. This isn't that big of a deal in of itself. Cities developed in places hard to defend all the time. Port cities were notorious for this problem. Natural harbors aren't all that common, so you got to deal with what you got to deal with. Any invading army could get up here on these hills surrounding the city and lob all sorts of bad stuff into the city. At a bare minimum, there should be some defenses up on the hills surrounding the city, denying any potential invading army the high ground. This sense of Anvil being low, hunkered down, and bracing itself against the weather is maintained as you approach the city. The stonework of the walls reflects the rough, rugged landscape. The ceramic red tile roofs further reinforces the idea that this is a place that regularly faces some pretty rough weather. You see the same sense of sturdiness, the need to resist the weather reflected in the stables. Red tile roofs and the post and beam construction looks a little sturdier than the rest of Cyrodiil. I'm going to keep harping on it all through this series. The philosophical and aesthetic choices the developers made keep causing them unnecessary problems. The architecture of the stables, not only does it contradict the architecture of the rest of Anvil, it contradicts itself. Setting aside boards as a cheap building material is an anachronism. Anvil is located on a dry, windswept, rocky coast, very reminiscent of the North Atlantic, with limited trees. So why would you then make a stable with walls only one board thick? This is particularly weird, bizarre, seeing how a good chunk of the same stable has walls made of stone and wattle and daub. Further adding to the confusion, the stone, wattle, and daub walls, not only do they fit in better with the rest of Anvil's architecture, the materials would be readily available in the environment surrounding Anvil. The boards, where do they get them? They'd have to import them. So much for cheap building materials. You see the same architectural contradiction with the cottage at the little farm outside of Anvil. Low stone structure fits in perfectly with the rest of Anvil's architecture. Why does this cottage have a thatched roof when the rest of Anvil, even the stables, have red tile roofs? We know why. The developers have used the same building model all over Cyrodiil. And in of itself, that's not a problem. As I've said earlier, this building type is ubiquitous all over Europe. But in this specific context, why the thatched roof? But Randy, you say, these are poor people. They can't afford the red tiles. They have to use the thatch. Okay, let's think about that a minute. Where on a dry, windswept, North Atlantic type coast would they get the thatch? Just like the boards, they'd have to import it. Why are poor people importing their building materials? One more thing. It's a little thing, but these things keep adding up. Moss grows in damp, humid environments. Anvil is dry and windswept. Why is there moss growing on this thatch? Overall, the walls of Anvil are pretty decent. Are they 100% accurate? No. But they give you enough detail, enough of what you expect, that allows your mind to fill in all the other details. My one main issue, the criticism would all depend upon how they would actually be implemented. But as shown, these arches shouldn't be there. These arches are an aesthetic choice, meant to show how Anvil is distinct from the other cities. But as a defensive measure, they're a mistake. If you can get up under these arches next to the wall, you're protected from defenders above. However, if there were arrow slits and murder holes in the tops of these arches, it would turn a defensive mistake into an asset. It would be very easy for the defenders to protect the bottom of the walls. The last place you'd want to be is down here. As I said in my Skingrad video, a city's gate is its front door. It's symbolic. It's telling the world we're a great place and you don't want to mess with us. Anvil's gate is very similar to Skingrad's gate. It's the same asset, just wrapped in a different skin. So a lot of my criticism of Skingrad's gate applies here as well. Anvil's gate is not so much a medieval gate as it is a 19th century Victorian romanticized interpretation of a medieval gate. Having said that, there are two design elements of this gate that I really like. The decorative metalwork on the gate itself and the red tiles on the battlements over the gate. Going back to the symbolic aspects of gates, all that fancy metalwork indicates that at some point in Anvil's history, they had money to throw around. Because using that amount of copper just to decorate your gates ain't cheap. The green patina on the copper indicates age. Anvil has been a wealthy city for quite some time. The red tile roofs that cover the gate's battlements, besides being aesthetically attractive, is defensively smart. It protects the people defending the gate. Most of Anvil is built out of stone. The buildings are low, wide, and sturdy, further reinforcing the idea the weather gets pretty rough around here. The storm shutters on some of the windows are a nice touch. Anvil is open and spread out. The streets are wide and well paved. It's easy to imagine wagon loads of goods rolling up and down these streets. There's a lot of money moving through Anvil. I can't quite put my finger on why, but for some reason, Anvil reminds me of an affluent southern town. Bit dusty, but laid back and easygoing. There's a lot of civic amenities in Anvil, trees and benches. Not only does the city have wells, with these wells, you see Anvil's unique aesthetic sensibilities, the use of domes and copper. I would attribute this to Anvil's constant contact with other civilizations. It makes sense that a port city's public parks have water features and statues of fantastical sea creatures. I really like the use of loggias and wide porches. Historically, loggias were commonly used to conduct business, and loggias and wide porches were found in environments that either had harsh sun or harsh weather conditions. Anvil's architecture is very sturdy. It gives off the impression of dependability, reliability, and longevity. All good things to be projecting if you're trying to convince people to trust you with their money. Anvil's architecture's form, structure, and materiality all work really well together to reinforce this symbolism. It makes sense that a city located on a rocky, windswept coast would be built primarily out of stone and tile, and then would use wood and metal as decorative elements. The building structures are mostly really well done. They're the same building models that were used for the stone and post and beam structures in Skingrad, but they've managed to avoid a lot of the mistakes they made in Skingrad. The building has the form of a post and beam structure, but it reads that the stone walls are load-bearing and the post, the vertical elements, are piers reinforcing the load-bearing stone walls. The beams, the horizontal elements, read as either decorative elements or balconies. The piers turn into brackets that hold up the balconies. While there's some technical issues, this wouldn't work. They look believable. The buildings have a really nice layering of textures, different treatments and stone carvings that add visual interest. A lot of the buildings in Anvil have these distinctive little Juliet balconies, but if you look closely, there's no access to these balconies from the interior, which makes them purely decorative, further reinforcing the idea that the people who built these buildings have money. Setting style aside, Anvil stone buildings have the same structure, the same building techniques as found in Skingrad's stone structures. The major difference, some of Anvil's buildings have these round additions with domes. Through the architecture, we can see that Anvil and Skingrad have a shared culture, shared building traditions, but Anvil has some extra outside influences. The interiors of Anvil's buildings are really well done as well, setting aside the video game tropes of spaces being too big with too much space in between the stuff. The floors are tiled, as you would expect, and a lot of the walls are plastered, as they should be. You have the wood structure of the floor above, and you all will notice it's not excessively weathered. Now, it's not all sunshine and cookies. Not only is that stone beam not structural, it's a health and safety violation. It can't exist. When you look around, you'll find the other occasional structural mistake as well. This would have fallen a long time ago. You even see the proper use of boards in a pre-industrial society as interior paneling, giving the room a sumptuous, luxurious feel. Whenever you show everything being the same, it starts to lose its symbolic value. The developers insist on showing the majority of buildings, no matter where, to be deteriorating in some sort of way. In Anvil, the plaster is falling off the stone walls. Now, whatever the developers think they're trying to say with this, it gets lost, because if every building has this, it starts to look like it's an aesthetic choice. Ironically, this further reinforces the idea that Anvil's a wealthy town. Peeling plaster along with patinaed copper reinforces the idea of time, stability. Anvil isn't just wealthy, it's old money. So if Anvil is old money, why is the abandoned house the only one in town made out of wood? Let's just accept, for argument's sake, that boards are commonly available in Cyrodiil. In Anvil, lumber has to be imported. It's a luxury good. This lumber is way too valuable to be allowed to be left out to rot. If this is truly an abandoned house, somebody would have come along a long time ago and hauled off all this valuable lumber. It should be an abandoned lot at this point. The developers are using board construction to symbolize low status, poor people's houses. Then why does this house have a red tile roof? Especially in the context of that little cottage on the farm outside of town that uses a thatched roof. So one group of poor people in Anvil import their building materials, and another group of poor people import their roofing materials. How does that make sense? Meanwhile, at the same time, the wealthy people in town are building their houses out of local materials. Oh, the complexities of the human condition. We see the same architectural contradiction with the buildings out at the docks. It is true that traditionally, buildings along docks were simpler and made of cheaper materials. But not here in Anvil. They're partially constructed out of imported luxury goods. Not only do the buildings not make sense economically, their materiality doesn't fit their environment. Walls that are one board thick are uninhabitable every time it storms. And if a hurricane hits town, kiss your building goodbye. The frustrating thing, they're so close to getting it right. Parts of the buildings, not only do they make economic sense, they fit the environment. They're post and beam construction with the rock infill. You limit the use of expensive materials to the structure and use the cheaper local materials for everything else. But I ask, if you really wanted to make these buildings cheaply as possible, why don't you make them out of stone like the rest of the town, but eliminate all the fancy details? We see the same problem with the docks. They shouldn't be made out of expensive imported wood. They should be stone piers. The docks also represent another symbolic problem. The developers have been using wood construction to represent low status, poverty. But yet, the docks, the source of Anvil's wealth, is shown to be constructed out of wood. Built-in contradiction. I really like the ship's design. They look like canaverals, which fit perfectly within what we assume to be the technology level of this world. The scale of the ships and the harbor itself is off. It's all too small. But again, these are sacrifices made, one, for technology limitations, and two, for game size. There's enough there that it all makes sense, and so we're willing to overlook it. The lighthouse looks like a lighthouse. That form has been around for thousands of years, and its materiality matches its function and its environment. The city of Anvil, like the rest of Oblivion, is a fascinating mixture of really good design mixed with not so good. The developers did a really good job establishing the unique environmental conditions of Anvil. And then they did a good job matching Anvil's buildings, their materiality, their construction techniques, their forms with that unique environment. The problem goes back to those philosophical and aesthetic choices the developers made. They chose the wrong material, wooden boards, to symbolize low status and poverty, to symbolize cheap, disposable building materials. In Anvil's situation, this problem is magnified because wooden boards are expensive imported luxury goods, the very last material you would be using for low-status, poor people's houses. At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about, and until next time, y'all be safe. If y'all are still here, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. While you're at it, why don't you like this video, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell. You can hear me yammer on about something else next time. And feel free to share this video far and wide.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.